Thank you so much for having me here today. It's an honor to be able to come and talk to you about mental health. I really want to focus today. We will get into some particulars around parenting toward the end of the lecture, like some how-tos and advice. But I want to start broadly and talk about first thinking of our mental health well-being from a systemic perspective and how it's affected by many of the different systems that we encounter every day. Not just the individual themselves. I also want to talk to you about a few of the noticeable issues that we have seen in different groups of people within the community, different subsets of our community, and then we'll finish up with some recommendations, advice about how to approach mental health from a community perspective, a family perspective, and then on the individual level as well. So first I want to start by talking about how we are a part of a system. And I think if we think of, just to give you an analogy as I'm talking through this, if it becomes confusing, if we think about a flower, right? And we plant the seed in the ground, and the seed is only conducive to that ground depending on the nutrients in the soil, how amenable the soil is to that seed so that it can grow, and then it grows based on the outward external forces of nature, right? Of the sunlight, the rain, the conditions of just nature, but also the people walking by, or if there's a lawnmower in sight, or all these different aspects of that ecology affect whether this flower grows and it blooms, or it grows and it dies, or it wilts, or whatever it is to become. All of that is affected by all the different parts of that system. And if we use that analogy and we think about our families, our children, they too are affected by all aspects of the system. It's not just one person in their life, it's not just them alone, it's all the people, all the environment, the ecology, all the things around them. So I want to lay that groundwork to say that as human beings, we're called upon to confront challenges in our daily lives all the time, right? And these are more or less difficult depending on the place, the time, the space, our community, family, and individual supports, and how we are able to navigate those. And that all boils down to the term of resiliency, how resilient we are. And how resilient we are is in direct relationship with our surroundings. It's also in direct relationship to how we attach meaning to things, who we surround ourselves with, the kind of company we keep. And also the biological, what we inherit, what are our genes, what do they make up, our psychological, the social, and the spiritual aspects of what is in our world system. Understanding that we have these dynamic influences on us, is it any wonder to any of you that we have actually a lot of challenges when it comes to our mental health well-being? Are any of you surprised by that? No? Okay. So if we think about this as a system and how it balances itself, so if we think about the system, let's think about like a water system, right? Where you have inputs and outputs with the water flow. If you have too much water coming in, what happens? You get overflow, right? If you have not enough water coming in, you can't wash your hands, right? So we look at the inputs and the outputs, the positive and the negative, and if the positive and the negative equal each other, we have what? Balance, right? If one overpowers the other, we have imbalance. Well, in addition to that, if we think about it as a system, again, outside of like who's using that system, right? And we think about a person who's coming up to if we think of a sink, for example, right? We're coming up to make, we'll do it at the sink. The sink itself has the water system flowing in it. How we utilize that sink, whether we turn on the hot water or the cold water, those are the sort of feedback loops that we're giving the sink as to how it can operate, right? Well, in the same way as human beings, we have those feedback loops. We don't just have the positive inputs and outputs that we're putting in, or in the marital dyad, the positive and negative that the husband and wife are putting in, or the family, all the people in the family, the positive and negative they're putting in, but the feedback loops as well that reinforce that positive or that negative. When systems break down, they do so because too much positive or too much negative is being put in, and the feedback loops that are reinforcing or taking away, because they can also have negative messages as well, right? Break down the whole system. And so it's a systemic issue, not, again, one person affecting the whole. Now, one person can have an effect on the whole, right? But the system itself operates because of all the parts in the system. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, great. So just some aspects of the system I want you to keep in mind are, first, the ecology. Do we all know what ecology is? So just to give you some definition, ecology is the distribution and abundance of life and the interactions between organisms and their environment, right? So we can think that as the big picture. The planet Earth, right, for example. The unaccounted for ecology that causes the extra layers of, if we think of a scaffold, like scaffold when you're building, think of our system like that. So the ecology is the outward part of the scaffolding. And because of our ecology, it can directly affect our mental health. So for example, one aspect of ecology, somebody works at home, right? They work from home. If they're working from home and their ecology is their home environment and they don't interact with other people, they don't get out, we often see this leading to increases in loneliness and depression. Okay, so that's a direct effect of that ecology. Didn't have anything to do with anyone else, per se. It's the environment itself, right? Technology. This is another part of our environment, right? And although we have derived many blessings from technology in the sense that we can see Allah's signs all over the world through the use of technology, technology itself has also created lots of mental health issues around feeling alienated, miscommunication, and creating loneliness for people. Consumerism. One of the parts of our culture here in America is consumerism, and that in itself has caused loneliness, boredom, and meaninglessness. And all of these things are part of our environment, part of that system. The earth itself, we have seen in more recent decades, is speaking to us as well, right? In terms of environment. We've depleted resources. We've also increased our rates of water and air pollution. And this has demonstrated a failure in our current ways of doing things as a system. And this has all had an effect on our psychology. Whether we are consciously aware of it or not, subconsciously it has had an effect. So we live in a time where we do have these advances in technology and the benefits of it, but ultimately the technology has developed in such a way that it's created a lack of mindfulness around noticing what's around us. Sometimes it's created a disconnection from our relationship with Allah, sometimes with other people, sometimes even with ourselves. And on a biological level, we've even seen proof of it altering the chemistry of the brain. If a child, for example, spends too much time on a screen. We know to eat and drink and sleep and void ourselves of impurities. If we have any trouble with these, we seek help for them, right? But we also, part of that being healthy is having a healthy psyche, right? And oftentimes people don't seek help for that, even though it's just as crucial and important as our eating, our sleeping, our diet, everything that we use to get through our daily lives. So everyone struggles to have mental health, and 1 in 4 struggle with mental illness. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that statistic, but 1 in 4 people in our lives struggle with mental illness. And only 1/3 of those seek help for that. So we have a lot of people in our society who are struggling with mental health issues and are not getting help. In addition to that, within our minority cultures, which is most of our culture as Muslims, even less get help because we have more stigma around getting help. And part of that is because of the struggles our own community has gone through, right? And part of it is a culture within our community. And it has had such an effect on our mental health and well-being that research has even come out to say that maybe our community as Muslims suffers a double stigma. Or another way of phrasing it, they have even coined it as a chronic traumatic stress. So we have an extra layer of stigma and stress that comes within in our community toward getting and seeking this help. But I think at this point, it's time to stop seeing it that way, right? We need to start seeing mental health as crucial as we do our breathing. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a just and fair person, and he taught us to be just and kind. He said, whoever does not thank people is not thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we must have gratitude and show kindness to people no matter what their struggle is. So if they came to you and said, I'm having some mental health issues, we need to be kind to them. And if we first seek to understand and listen to what's going on before speaking, then we can demonstrate that quality. If we acknowledge that sometimes they need help that is beyond our control and our knowledge, then this too is a kindness. And finding them the appropriate help is what we would want to do. So one example, just to illustrate this point, is if we think about in Quran about the story of Moses, right? And how he goes on this journey and he finds himself in circumstances that he doesn't understand the reality. He understands one reality and the guide on the journey understands a different reality, and he keeps telling him, you're not going to understand this, right? And in many ways, mental health and mental illness can be very similar when we see somebody close to us going through this. And how it applies also, we can think about this in the larger sense of some of the illnesses that are more apparent when people hear voices or those sort of things. We can also think about it when it comes to raising our children, when they come home with a culture and questions and a way of doing things that are so foreign to us. Because that too is something that we may not understand, but it's real to them, right? So in the same way that you can have empathy or develop empathy for people who have voices that they're hearing or ways of doing something that you don't understand, with our children, we need to also approach it that way. And it may not be as apparent because they're not presenting necessarily what we would call a mental illness, right? They're presenting a different way of doing things that we don't understand, right? So I want to bring that from the large to the small. In all cases, we're going to want to approach it very similarly with that kindness, that compassion, the virtues that, we're taught. Okay. So just to reemphasize, the field of mental health is much like that guide on the side that's attempting to assist human beings in their own reflective understanding, right? So the idea of mental health therapy, psychotherapy, is not that you're going to come into someone's office and they're going to tell you how to be. The idea is that they're your guide on the side to help you figure it out, to help you figure it out with your own values, with your own way of doing things. Now, on occasion, there can be things like psychoeducation, right, to educate you about something maybe you don't understand or don't know about. But the real purpose is to be that guide on the side and help you to learn how to overcome anxiety, to be able to reach a state of calm, to look at, well, what are the biological factors that are impacting the person? Because we know there are genes that actually affect different mental health issues, right? People can continue to function hurt, injured, and ill. And we know that hurt people hurt other people. So as long as we don't acknowledge the pain in society and in our community, then the pain perpetuates itself. This creates a cycle, and rather than eliminating the dis-ease of our community, it grows. And it multiplies like a virus. So that's an important thing to remember, that hurt people do hurt people. That's all they know. And when we see this in people who are, for example, sexual predators, right? More often than not, they too have been a victim of a sexual predator. And it becomes a cycle, and it keeps going through our community. And when we don't discuss these things, the pattern doesn't get broken. It's when we bring it out into the light. And when I say bring it out into the light, I mean in an appropriate setting with appropriate people who are trained to help the people with this. I don't mean what we've seen in the last number of decades where they have these shows that are like tabloidish and bring it out in public like that. That's not what I'm talking about, because that's actually not helpful. And it actually traumatizes people who haven't been traumatized, right? So we have a concept called vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is what we all get as a community when we see these horrific pictures coming out of Syria or, Iraq and all these dead bodies and things. We get vicarious trauma from that as a people, because we're seeing things that the human being wasn't really created to be able to endure, right? So it's not just that. So there's a way, a means about we go about in addressing this. That doesn't mean we bring it out to everyone, but we do bring it out. We bring it forward, because oftentimes people who are being victimized think that if I just keep it to myself, then I'll protect someone else from having to experience it. When in point of fact, it's usually not just them getting the experience to begin with. It's multiple people. And these kind of abuses tend to happen to the people we know the most. It's not the stranger. We teach our kids about stranger danger, right? But it's not the strangers, actually. The higher percentage of people perpetrating these kind of acts are close to us. They know us. So it's something that we need to encourage with our children, that we allow them a place and space to bring this forward and talk to us, because that's the only way we will rid our community of these actions. And we have to be willing to accept and acknowledge that human beings are human beings, whether they're Muslim or not Muslim, and they're capable of evil, even if they're a Muslim. So one of the ways to start this awareness in our community is to recognize there are a few different ways of learning, right? And when we appreciate that, and when we learn to acknowledge that, what we find is that our children will be more receptive. So some of these learning styles, as you can see from the slide up above, include visual learning, musical auditory learning, physical kinesthetic. So I want to go back to the musical auditory, for example. If you find that your child is a musical learner, you can start the things that they need to learn for school. If they start creating a song out of them, they'll be much more apt to learn it, as opposed to just trying to memorize it by speaking it. And the physical kinesthetic, we're talking about having some kind of physical relationship to the learning. So tactile learning, feeling things. Some people are more, especially our kids that tend to be a little bit more hyperactive, let's say, they need to feel things. They need to be in contact with them, and they'll learn better that way. There's the logical, mathematical. There's the people who have the combination of all. There's the social, so like the verbal learner who needs to talk it out. Have you ever seen the children who want to just talk? Those are children who that's how they learn. They need to talk it through. So we need to be cognizant of this and figure that it's easy to test for. It's a very simple survey, in fact, to discover what your child's learning type is. And I have this actually posted on a website, which I will give to Sister Iman later to give to the community, so that if you want to use it at home and find for your children what their learning style is, it's very easy. So I want to move on and talk about, a better way of understanding what mental health and mental illness is first defining and understanding what each of those are. What's health, what's illness, right? And so when we think about illness, we're thinking about what disrupts our daily lives. What is so impactful that we can't go about our regular daily life without it impacting us, right? Without it causing us to change our course through the day. That's what we would consider illness, something that affects you to the point where you can't continue to go through the day. Health, on the other hand, is when you have balance, right? So for everyone, this will be more or less challenging, and it doesn't look the same for every person. It's a little bit different for every person. But none of us are immune to these challenges. So when we think about it, again, I want to put that paradigm back in your mind about that we're looking at, when we look at the person, the individual, they have these different parts, right? They have the psychological, the biological, and the social and spiritual often get put together, although I would technically separate them out. All these parts make up the different parts of health. And we think about like the biological, that's gene expression. And then the psychological, how we're thinking about it, the social, spiritual, how we're coping. And I want to talk a little bit about the brain. And my brain is gone from here. But there are basically 3 parts to the brain. And in modern science, we like to think that we came up with this, but Imam al-Ghazali even talks about this. This is not a modern thing. We actually have it in our text as well. If anybody wants to go and read what Imam al-Ghazali has to say about it. So we have like this part of the brain, which outside of our community, the evolutionary theorists call the reptilian brain, which is why it has an R. But this is the first part of the basic part of the brain, right? Because we divide basically the brain into 3 parts. And so we have the reptilian brain, which is our basic needs. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs, it's the urges, it's what keeps us going through the day, in terms of the anxiety, that's a positive anxiety that keeps us toiling, that keeps us going. But it doesn't have rationality, it doesn't have emotion, it's just, that basic need-driven part. Then we have the midbrain, and the midbrain is where all our emotionality comes from. And we see this in little children, right? We all start out with the basic emotion of anger. Anger is one of the first emotions that everyone experiences. And you'll see this first in very small children when they cry, when they get angry, they don't know how to express themselves before language, right? And then when they learn language, the first word is no or la, right? Before they say yes or nam, right? It's always no. So they have this anger first. And then as they get older, they have temper tantrums. And then, so the anger is there. And anger actually can be a positive emotion when we think about it being useful for resources, for daily, like human needs, like water, life, food, getting angry about something like that. That's like a positive, justified anger. It can also be quite destructive, as we know. So then the last part, the neocortex, is responsible for rationality. This is where the rationality comes in. And so we can think of people in our lives who fit all of these different things, right? We can think of people who are reptilian. I used to, many, many years ago, I used to teach Islam to women in prison. And one of them came up to me afterwards when I was doing this presentation one time, and she said, I see this all the time here, the reptilian brain, where people are without emotion, without rationality, are behaving, right? We know people who are constantly emotional, and that's where they stay. They just don't get out of their emotion. We also know people who never get out of their head. They're always rational, and they can't think beyond the rational, right? So we've seen all 3 types of these people. What we want to strive for is the balance of these. That's where we want to get. And the Prophet himself, salatu wasalam, talked about in Eternity about how, because of this imbalance, because of the lack of balance that people have with this, we want to love people, but we only want to love them to a point. Meaning that we don't ever want to share everything about ourselves with the people, because at some point they may grow to hate us, right? And that's a very human reality. And in converse, the same is true. Don't hate a person too much, because at some point you may grow to love them. And so you want to find that balance. So How does that translate down to our children? We don't want to know everything about our children. We do want to know everything about our children, but we should not want to know everything about our children. We should not also share everything with our children that we know. Although they may want us to answer everything for them, we shouldn't do that. And this is precisely why, right? They have to find balance. We have to have balance. We're not in control of everything. Allah may make them so that they, step away from us for a while. Or, you see what I'm saying? So there has to be that balance. And we shouldn't be striving for complete control over what they're doing and knowledge of what they're doing, and vice versa. So I'll give an example where this happens with the parent to the child. Sometimes because of childhood experiences and family experiences, one of the things I can tell you is that, let me find that slide. When we look at the generational patterns of any given family, we can see that, okay, maybe I passed it somewhere. We can see that, Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to find that slide right now. But we have what we call genograms, right? Genograms look much like a family tree. And what we do is we start with the family, the mother and the father. We have the children, and then so on, right? We can trace for 10 generations accurately patterns in families, whether it be social patterns, behavioral patterns, domestic violence, car accidents happening at the same time of year, very strange happenings, births, and even how you choose your spouse. We can tell you basically what kind of spouse you're going to choose based on the family structure and experience you've been having. So with that, I lost my point completely. We're going from the brain to the genogram. What was that? The pattern, yeah. So we can do a lot of work with this and figure out what's best for your family in terms of the needs and on an individual level. But, yes, I know what I was going with this. Was an example of something that happens that's inappropriate from the parent-child relationship on the parent side, right? So let's say there has been some kind of sexual violence in a family that perpetuates generationally. What often happens with women in that situation, or men, but I've seen it more with women, is they will talk to their kids about sex, not in a clinical way, not like in a way that's appropriate, because we do need to have those conversations with our children, but in a way that's inappropriate. They'll tell them about their sex lives with their spouses or others. And what that ends up doing is it corrupts, the child a little bit, or a lot. And that's one of the ways in which sharing, I was talking about we shouldn't share everything, that we shouldn't be sharing things like that, right? On the other side, with children sharing with their parents, when we think about how we make change ourselves, like let's say we want to change our diet and we want to do better in terms of exercise, we don't always want to have somebody on top of us saying, that's got 100 calories in it, or that's got 1,000 calories in it, or you need to spend 10 more minutes on the treadmill or something, right? We want people to give us the space to make the change. Sometimes we need darkness, not light, on that, making that change. So with our children, we want to show them that too, right? That we can give you a little space, we trust you enough. We're going to give you some space where we don't know everything that you're doing. But we still want to be in the know of what you're doing. We still want to have those conversations around what you're doing so that we're all on the same page. But I don't need to be on top of you to find out what that is. We can have mutual respect, we can understand. And this changes based on their developmental stage, right? So the prophet himself set this up for us. It's not like rocket scientists, that we have to be rocket scientists to know this. For the first 7 years, we're focusing on, are you guys familiar with the 7-7-7 rule? Okay. So for the first 7 years, we're focusing on the habitual aspects, right? The rote memory type things where it's, this is how you make salat, for example. These are the movements. These are the times a day, memorizing, that sort of focus. The second 7 years, they're becoming more companions, not like our buddies, friends, but companions, and that they start using that emotional and the rational parts of their brain. And we need to pull on that so that they can learn how to become good decision makers. How do they do that on their own? With guidance from us. Because in the last 7 years there, before they reach full adulthood, by that point, we should be more like their advisors, their guides on the side, not on top of them, not telling them still what we were doing in the first 7 years, take the trash out and do all that. By that point, they should be self-motivated, self-encouraged, understand their part in that whole system of why it's important for them to do it, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So I'm just going over the overview, a shell of that 7-7-7 rule. There's a lot more we can go in depth with that each 7 years that maybe we'll do another time, but today I just want to give you the overview of it. 7-7-7. The third 7 is when you're going to be more of the guide on the side. You're going to be, hopefully by that point, beyond having to instruct them about the routine things that they need to do, beyond creating the how do you think about things, how do you make decisions, to let's look at the decisions you're making. Are these good decisions? Are these poor decisions? How can you do better? And putting it back on them to think and give you the answers. And then you can guide them. But it shouldn't be, okay, I told you to do this, now do it, and that's it. At that point, you should be beyond that, because when you try to tell a young adult, and it actually has become, in our community in America, I think even younger ages now, but when you try to tell them, this is how to do it, and you should do it just because I said so. Now, personally, as a parent, I think that should be okay. That we should be able to say, I said to do it, so therefore it's important to you and you should do it. But realistically, I know that will not work. And they have to buy into it. They have to see why it's important to them. If when we tell them to do it just because we said to do it, and they are like teenagers, for example, this can be a point of rebellion for them. And they can say, oh, so you want me to do this, and if I don't do it, it'll make you angry, so let me not do it. Because that will be a nice rebellion for me, and get my point across that I'm not going to do what you say all the time. I know, it's challenging. So I want to look at now, I want to transition and look at a little bit of some more particular issues to some of the subset groups in our community, right? And I think one of the larger challenges for our community is looking at those who are born somewhere else and those who are born here in America, right? And merging those two realities together. What I call this is living between two worlds, right? Because you're always living between two worlds and never feeling like you live completely in one. And that can be challenging for the first generation, the people who have come to America. And it's also challenging for the children, but in totally different ways. So let's talk about that a little bit. So for the person who has come to America, they have their old ways of doing things, and then the new challenges of how to make that work here. Are they going to let go of things? Are they going to keep things? How is that going to work out for them? And it's almost like half of their soul is rooted somewhere else and half of it is here. And if we just think about that, take ourselves out of that and just think about an individual like that, how difficult that must be. Just that reality alone, without anybody else interacting with it. And also the expectations of everyone back home thinking how wonderful it must be here. You must not have any challenges here. This is the land of milk and honey, so everybody should be doing well. And then also giving back to everybody back home, right? So but what it really is, the reality of it, it's really survival. It's survival both of just basic living needs, but also the mental well-being of the person. Like, how do they adjust to that? With our children who are in families of immigrants, they have a similar reality where they are living half with their parents' desire of maintaining that sentimentality of what used to be, and then also the new environment they find themselves in, fitting in with a culture that is completely different than, or it's really in contrast to our values as Muslims. The dominant culture really does not tend to value our values. So how do they work themselves through that and please parents? And so what we often see happening with these children is they have a dual existence. They act one way at home and they act another way with everyone else. And this can be quite dangerous, right? Because if we do not get our arms around this as a community, what we can find is within a generation, our kids will be out of Islam because they will not know how to reconcile and how to live balanced with this dual reality between what their parents want, what society is asking for them. If we're not aware of that and we're not creating spaces where they can talk about this and explore this and figure out how to reconcile it, right? Am I saying anything here that people are not familiar with? Are you guys familiar with this? Oh, okay. Okay. So let's go and also look at, I know I've seen, you guys have converts in your community, right? So converts too have their own special mental health and well-being issues to deal with. Many times it's because they have either been disowned by their families in some way or cut off from resources because of their choice to be Muslim. Or if that's not the case, it's just finding new community. They leave values that they don't agree with to choose new values, and then that can be particularly harsh when they're trying to find a social life. So oftentimes they feel orphaned, for lack of a better word, and they don't feel necessarily welcomed in the communities because our communities tend to be tribal, right? We still tend to be a little tribal. So that's another issue, another mental health issue that we need to look at and be thinking seriously about, and how we can welcome these newcomers into our community and make them feel actually a part of the community and integrated into the community. One of the ways I think this can happen is that by building bridges between our communities of the indigenous Muslims, the Muslims who have been in America for hundreds of years now, with the immigrant Muslims. If we can do a better job of building bridges there, we'll be able to create those more idyllic communities. Because the indigenous Muslims have been doing this for a long time. I mean, they know America, right? They've been doing it for a long time. And we have to find ways of transcending our tribalism, our ethnocentrism, our preference for, different racial, characteristics. We really need to work on that. Another issue that is confronting our community right now is about marriage, right? So we have the issue of people who are who want to get married but cannot find spouses, and who are married and suffering, and because of the dominant culture promoting illicit relationships, it's made it even harder for those who want to have halal relationships to find partners. This has created even within our community, people having adultery, fornication, and this has happened actually enough in our community generationally that now children don't trust the idea of a spouse, right? So they don't trust that if I marry someone, they're going to be faithful to me because they've seen cheating now. It's gone on long enough in our communities that a whole generation now has this idea. So what we see in our sisters, we see sisters who are reaching the age of 40 and never being married and still wanting to get married but cannot find suitable spouses. On their brother's side, they have some similar complaints, although it's not quite as challenging for them to find spouses, but they're still finding some challenge. We have to get a little bit more creative in how we're thinking about this, because let's go back to our teenagers, right? So they're confronted with, in high school, enormous realities in the dominant culture about sex, right? It's not just sex, but drugs, pornography, lots of different vices. And it really starts in elementary school. By junior high, we're seeing many people have already had sex. By high school, our children are just being challenged to survive it if they are in a mixed environment. So with that challenge, how do we address it? Do we say, well, these are our values, you know our values, you can't do it, and that's it? Or do we say, okay, let's talk about this, and when you have this challenge, you have these, because it's normal for them hormonally to have urges toward being interested in the opposite sex, thinking about sex. So what do we do about that? We ask them to come to us and talk to us. But in doing so, we have to be ready as parents as well, right? We have to be ready for those conversations, be comfortable with those conversations ourselves. They need to be able to come to us and talk about it. We need to create a space for that, number one. Number two, we need to think about, well, if their cohort of friends who may or may not be Muslim, right, are going out and having sex with people, what can we do to create a halal environment so that they don't do the same thing? We have a couple of choices, right? We can either allow them to start getting married younger, which I know a lot of people are opposed to, because they think about education and all these other things, but that would be a halal existence, right? Or we can inspire them in some way not to engage in these activities, but we have to figure out what that is. We can't wait for them to figure it out. They don't know, right? So how many of you identify with this? Anybody identify with this? Okay. Do you guys feel comfortable talking to your children about these things? Yes? Okay. How about the men? You guys are kind of like, yeah, okay. Okay, that's good. Because, if you don't feel comfortable, there are ways of addressing that as well, right? We create classes and we talk about these things and how you can talk to your kids, right? On specific issues. Another group that we have neglected to really address the mental health of is our African American Muslims, right? African American Muslims have been suffering from the legacy of oppression for more than 200 years, and we fail to really give this the attention that it deserves. And I worry that this is one of the things that Allah will hold us most accountable for in our community, because we've been so neglectful of it. So that's another one I want to put on your radar and to give some thought to. And then I also want to talk about, how are we doing on time? Are we okay? Okay. How we counter violent extremism, right? This has been a topic that people have been concerned about with the children. And we often look at the ends of it rather than the beginnings of it. Like, how did the kids get there to begin with, instead of looking at, well, what happened to them in the end. So something that is not all that radical, when we think about the ends of it, like in terms of when we get a suicide bomber, for example, right? This idea is actually not all that radical when we think about American teens. Because in American teenage life, 3 out of 5 teenagers have suicidal ideation. This means they think about committing suicide. And in my experience as a therapist, I can tell you that I believe that's low. Because every teenager I've ever asked the question to, they've responded positively that they've had suicidal ideation. Now, that doesn't mean that they have a plan. It just means that they've thought about it. So what leads our kids to thinking about this? Well, there can be a biochemical induced aspect of it, right? Some pharmaceuticals can cause people to become suicidal if they're not taken correctly. There's a biological aspect to that, possibly, but that's not always the case. And it's most likely not the case. It can happen, but it's not the higher percentage of cases that we see. Most children reach this state of contemplating suicide because they feel that their lives have become incongruent. Are we all familiar with this word incongruent? Okay, so incongruency is when, let's go back to the child of immigrants, for example, right? When we think about their life matching, congruency is like matching. So is what I say I believe in matching with my action? Is what are my actions matching with what I'm saying I believe? When I go home, is that matching with my outside? And when these two things become so imbalanced and out of whack, where they don't match, they can't reconcile them, they can't find their peace, that's when we see kids turning to suicide. Not because they really see that as a solution per se, because most children that we have who have attempted but didn't complete say that they wish they'd never tried, right? So, but it's that they don't know how else to handle it. They don't know how else to deal with it. And one of the problems we have had as a challenge in our community is in terms of, we go to spirituality, which is great. I mean, in the sense that I totally believe that our salah, our fasting, all these things actually do produce methods that will keep us balanced and in check. But what we have failed to do as a community at large, not the IOK community, but at large, is to inspire our children as to how those tools actually reach that balance. We have not made that connection for them. We stopped at the first 7 where we were teaching them how to do it. We didn't teach them how to connect to it. How does prayer actually help you? You know, we don't teach them that. Or they don't see it, right? They don't see it amongst us. They don't see it working for us. And so this is where we need a lot more work. But what we shouldn't do is kind of put our heads in the sand, you know, like ostriches, and pretend like this is not happening. Because it's kind of like the saying where you see a mouse, you have mice. When we hear of a suicide, it's not the one suicide. We have suicidal kids. There's more than one. They don't just exist by themselves. And unfortunately, that can be kind of contagious, right? So if children are talking about that and they think that's an option, it can be contagious. So we really need to get into this and understand it and get our arms around it and do something about it. Okay. So I realized that was heavy. I can feel the heaviness in the room. So we'll try to find something else to talk about. Okay, we're going to go lighten up a little bit. So another aspect we need to consider is our cultural production in terms of connecting with our children. When I speak of cultural production, I'm talking about the movies they watch, the music they listen to, you know, all of those different aspects that make up culture, art. If we look at what's available to them, see, we're not going to be able to control all the environment that's out there. And we have to be mindful constantly of our locus of control. What are we actually able to control? What can we not control? Let's work on what we can, let go of what we can't, but be mindful of it so that we are discussing it with our children. Because what's popular right now, both in music and in film and so forth, like here are 3 of the most popular shows on TV right now, right? All 3 of these shows have strong female characters, but their strength is derived not from their education, although they are educated. It's derived from their sexuality, right? And so that's what our girls are seeing, and our boys are seeing as their models in society, right? So it's not your education that empowers you, it's your sexuality. And how you use that will be meaningful. So for example, I'm assuming a lot of you are not familiar with the content of the Girlfriend Experience. But the Girlfriend Experience is a show that I took some time to get familiar with because I kept hearing about it. And from young people. This show, the plot of the show is that this woman, she's going to become a lawyer. She can't afford her law school, so eventually what she does instead is to start selling herself for money as a escort, yes. And what eventually happens is that overwhelms, the money she's making for that overwhelms her, and she leaves her education behind and does this full time. She becomes international. And as a result, what this shows, right, it doesn't show any of the downsides of what that reality is like, how the horrible reality that these women go through that actually do this work. It glamorizes it. It makes it seem like it's okay. And in fact, it shows it as an option to our young people that, hey, if you can't afford school, you can do this, right? But if we're not familiar with the content of these, then we can't have those conversations about it, right? In addition, in the music right now, if we listen to the lyrics, the tunes are so catchy that oftentimes it lulls our kids into listening to it just because the tunes are, is there a problem? Okay. The tunes are catchy. But if we listen to the lyrics, the lyrics are crying out pain, right? So they're talking about, like in this song, Can't Feel My Face. This is a code for using cocaine. If you use cocaine, you can't feel your face. So when I can't feel my face, I can't feel my face and I'm with you because we're both using cocaine, right? Now, we wouldn't just necessarily know that if we're not familiar with that world, right? And there's lots of code words. I mean, like even with the texting, right? So they have like the word DM. Usually for us who are not so tech savvy, we take that to mean direct message. For a young person, it means a nude picture. So, yes. So we need to be in the know of these things. We need to understand these things to do our parenting well. Again, like the hotline bling, we even saw President Obama's face put on this one as a meme, right? This one is about getting calls for sex in 2 a.m. in the morning. Alicia Keys, who a very well-known singer, her latest song is about, we're both messed up, so we have this in common, so we should be together, right? And the idea is that what they're crying out here is we're in pain. We have to use drugs to be together. We're all messed up, and these are the messages. So even if they're not consciously thinking, yeah, I think that about myself, or I buy that, the repetitive nature of these will affect them subconsciously, right? So it's one of those inputs that we need to be mindful of. But one of the ways we can get around this is inspiring our own cultural production, right? So how many of you are familiar with the jazz musician Coltrane? Okay, a lot of you. Well, okay, so he was a very famous jazz musician, and he was a Muslim, right? So we have people out there who are producing culture that we can take part in that is not only just good, it can be a good outlet for us, but it's healthy and it's mindful of our values, right? So we just need to pay attention to these things because, like, some of these things we're just not familiar with the code words that are being used in them, right? One of the songs that came out, this song by Daya, is about where have all the good boys gone, right? And it's expression of kind of what we see all the time with our Muslim women complaining about, where are all these good men? Where can we find men who are willing to be men, who are willing to take care of their families, who are willing to stay married, who are willing to be faithful? Like they cry out in these songs about what's going on socially, right? So it's just something to, again, to pay attention to make sure that there's a balance. If we can't cut out music altogether, for example, because our kids will be too rebellious toward that, then perhaps maybe we balance it with, okay, let's listen to Quran, or let's listen to lectures an equal amount of time, or something. We have to find some creative way of not letting this become the oversaturating point, but rather some balance. You're not going to be able to avoid it completely. In fact, you don't want to avoid it completely, because if we avoid it completely and shelter our kids completely from it, then when they take that first step outside to the reality of the dominant culture, they will be crushed. It's like the person who's too sweet gets taken advantage of all the time, right? So we can't completely shelter it. We need to have the discussions around, how do you manage this? You're going to confront it. How do you manage it? What can we do about it? Okay. So I think that, I'm not sure, how are we doing on time? Are we okay? Okay. Okay, so I had another part that I wanted to go into, just about how, the food we eat also represents, is another sign of our mental well-being, right? But I want to check first, how are you guys feeling? Are you feeling overwhelmed, or are you feeling okay? You're okay? Okay. Good, okay. So if we think about, yes, I should mention that we do have some of our kids who are fighting back on this cultural production. So whereas the hotline bling talked about going out more and wearing less, we have a hijabi here who is wearing a t-shirt that says she's going to start wearing more and going out less. So that's their reaction to, we are not taking part in this, right? And that's something we should encourage. They're finding that internal strength, that internal drive to resist it. But so one of another sign of Allah's that's, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's so great for us in society is nutrition is another aspect that is part and important for our mental health and well-being. And we can see signs of this in the food we eat, right? So this will lighten things up a little bit more, and we'll then go into some practical solutions. But if we look at the walnut, for example, it has direct implications on brain. And it looks, if you crack it open, it looks like a brain. The tomato looks like the heart chambers. The carrot looks like the eye. The grapes look like the, sacs in the lungs, the air sacs. And here's my genogram picture that I was trying to find earlier. So that's what a genogram looks like. If you go to actual therapy at any point, within the first couple of sessions, if you're going for family therapy or you're going for marital therapy, or even individual therapy, if this is sort of the focus, they should do this for you. This should be one of the first sessions you have, and you can request it. It's something almost like your medical chart that you keep for your physicals. You should keep a copy of this. You can pass it on to your children. It helps in identifying what they should be aware of as they're moving forward in life. Okay. So let's look at some practical solutions of what we might be able to do on the different levels of society, right? So on a communal level, we need to help our young and our middle-aged community members figure out how their ritual practice assists them with everyday life, right? How does that connect? How is it relevant to helping them throughout their days? Also, we need to make sure that we have culturally appropriate resources to provide to the community. So as I'm here, purporting that you should consider mental health as psychotherapy as an option, I really want to add the caveat that you find someone who is culturally appropriate, who knows your Muslim values. I can safely say that not all of my colleagues do. And not only that, I can safely say that there are some who will not support your values. So it's really important to be a good consumer in this regard if you choose to go this route and find somebody who is culturally appropriate and who also values your values. And that should be something that they're willing to talk about on the phone before you even go to pay for anything, right? We also need to get to know our families in the community better and help them when they need help so that their dignity stays intact, right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself created this concept called brothering, where he would brother companions together. And the idea of the brothering was that they had to know each other so well they became like brothers. And this worked so well in the Ummah that there were some people that were even talking about inheritance rights by the time that someone passed away because they felt so close to each other. We need to come up with the same, either use the same concept or come up with something similar to know our community members better. And when we do this, that is how we can know somebody to the point where we know what they need before they ask. We can help families keep their dignity intact. It should not be in our community that somebody gets ill, somebody has, something like an abuse of some sort, whether it be domestic violence or sexual abuse, that goes on for years and we don't know about it. We should know our community members well enough to know that. And actually that is one of the signs, typically, of abuse. It happens in the dark. It happens when people aren't noticing. And how do you make that happen? To keep everything quiet, to keep people out, to not let people know what's going on. So we need to work on creating relationships in such a way that we know each other that well. Okay. I think also another thing that we can do, so in the field of psychology, we've moved way beyond Freud, although a lot of people are not aware of that. Psychoanalytic theory was useful in some ways, but we have moved beyond that. We have family systems now. We look at things from a systemic perspective. But we also have some colleagues who are looking at creating an Islamic psychology. And I think that that's something we need to support as well, that blends both the good parts of Western psychology with our Islamic tradition. We have some texts in our Islamic tradition that speak to psychology. They're not translated. People don't know them that well. So we need to support the people who are doing that work on a communal level. On a family level, we can work to ensure that our families are healthy, right? And one of the ways we do this is through our awareness, like we're doing today. We can trace patterns of the interpersonal behaviors in the family histories, like with the genograms. We can address those patterns. The awareness is not enough. We can actually do something about it. The ones that need repair. And we can make, other choices. We can create more educational opportunities about the stages of life development and how we can work as families through those life development stages better and empower our families with the education. So if it were up to me, for example, every community would have parenting classes like on a regular basis, teaching about the stages of life development and how to communicate with our children. We would also have premarital classes, right? And we would have postmarital classes. One of the things that we do with our married people, we say, congratulations, we're so happy for you, mashallah, tabarakallah, right? We're like so happy for them when they get married. What we don't say to them is, when it gets rough, call me, because the first 2 years of marriage are the hardest. And we don't tell them that reality, right? We're just kind of like, enjoy your honeymoon, be on your way. It's all good, right? We need to encourage them that, it actually, the reality is, it's kind of tough, and we are here to help, right? Okay. Another, again, with the marital issues is allowing people to get married when they're ready to get married. We should not be putting any kind of barriers in their way to do that, right? We should be encouraging it. We should be providing easier ways for people to get married. We need to question and break down and look at ethnic values, cultural values that prevent that from happening, because sometimes that's the issue, right? We need to re-examine that and look at it. On an individual level, we need to plant seeds early to train ourselves how to be resilient. So one of the things that I'm working on right now, and inshallah we'll have this within a year's time as a sustainable model, but I'm working on resiliency with children. So we're working on a plan to have propagated in the school systems and the mosque that teach children from pre-K to junior high how to be resilient, right? And so the idea is that by the time they leave junior high and they enter high school, they will know how to handle the issues that are coming at them. But this doesn't work in a vacuum. It has to work with the whole community. So part of this model is that the teachers are involved, the parents are involved, the people who open the doors of the facility are involved. Everybody is involved in that process. So that's something. And also destigmatizing the ability to get mental health services. We can be the first to say, this is an option. This is a doable option. This is something that we should consider, and model it ourselves. And we can do a self-check. If we need help, we should seek it. We now have a few mental health therapists in both LA and Orange County who are Muslim therapists who are culturally appropriate. We have others who are becoming therapists, and so there's more of it available, and we should avail ourselves of it and support those who are doing it. Okay. Yes. Sure. So I was just going to wrap up, actually, with us to remember one more concept, which is that the concept of trauma. And trauma and neglect are two sides of the same coin, right? So neglectfulness can be just as traumatizing as trauma. And we don't often know this, right? So I want you to know that. So the idea is that we will, our path is to find the middle way, right, as Muslims. If we think about the Jewish community, right, we're all about the law. The heart of Jewish theology is law. It's the Sharia, right, it's the law. The heart of the Christian community is rahmah, it's the mercy. Our path is the middle way. It's the two. It's the Sharia and it's the Rahmah, right? And our tradition, our teaching is that we lean a little bit more toward the Rahmah than we do the law. So that's the idea, the concept I want to leave you with when we think about our children and our families and our marriages and all the people in our community. We do both. We're the middle way. And we lean toward Rahmah before we lean toward the Sharia, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. To go either way, one way or the other, is going to be an imbalance, right? If we're too heavy on the law, it becomes harsh. If we're too easy on the Rahmah, then people do what we see often in the Christian community, where people feel like they can do whatever and they're forgiven. So we have to find our balance. Imam al-Ghazali suggested that the solution begins with adjusting one's perspective, with a reminder that each of us is in need of each other, that we have limited power and we are all vulnerable like everyone else to sickness, worries, and sadness. We combat this through kindness and love and being open to supporting and seeking the help we need and for others we love, even if the people on the street need it. So I'll conclude with that, inshallah. Alhamdulillah.
It will be recorded. Just one question. I want to ask that you were mentioning earlier about the family chart, like what we need to put in the family chart. I know the family tree is different, but you were talking about like different, right? So
Right.
what we need to put, like what information we need to put, what is important, and what we can skip, or that's what I want to know.
Okay, so what we ask is, there are about 4 pages of questions that you ask. It starts with the basics of when were you born, where were you born, all of these things, who's in the family, so like the family tree. But then you start asking questions about, well, what are your ideas on race? What does your family think about, what foods do you eat? All these more social questions. Was there any mental illness in your family? If so, what type? And sometimes, like in earlier generations, they didn't have a name for something, right? But you can collect the symptoms of it. So was there extreme sadness? Was there moodiness? Like somebody was one way one day and one day another day. There's different ways of getting at it, right? But there's like about 4 pages of questions. There's an article that I typically use with my students about cultural genograms, how to do them. I can send that to Sister Iman, and she can pass it on.
Facebook Institute of Knowledge. Any questions? Anyone? Yes. No? Comment, suggestion?
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I just wanted to say, Jazakallah khair, that was a really
Alaikum.
very informative lecture that you gave. And there's something that you said that really resonated with me. As a parent, I have a 9-year-old son. And, over the course of the years regarding my husband and I raising him and giving them information about Islam, one thing that I'm constantly trying to be very conscious about is the fact of, I feel like as parents, one thing that you said is regarding bridging the gap, the connection regarding the ibadah and his own personal interconnection. So, I do firmly believe regarding there's no compulsion in religion, but I feel like within that, it's important for us as parents to make sure we're planting that seed where it's like, not only are you teaching your children about the Islam, but helping them understand the purpose. Because, as far as us not being from an Arabic-speaking background, sometimes I assess him standing there praying with us, and he's going through the Arabic, but it's like the meaning and having it resonate with the heart. So I just thought that was a very important point that you brought up regarding constantly as parents questioning regarding how much are you letting your children understand the why regarding the ibadah, like the purpose, and having him as a 9-year-old boy figure it out for himself. Because even sometimes, as human beings, I'm struggling and I have questions myself. We all do. But for our younger children who, like you said, in the world that we're living in, the dominant culture in society, it's like constantly making sure we're kind of helping them figure out Mommy, why are we praying? Who cares? What's the big deal? What is the purpose of fast? So therefore, inshallah, when our backs are turned, like you said, inshallah, they can make those good moral decisions based on the guidance that we've given them thus far. So I just thought it was a beautiful point that you made, because I do, analyze that so much and think about it regarding, I want him to be able to make decision based on having that firm, grounded, roots of the understanding of the Islam.
Right, and so if their native tongue is not Arabic, right, then we should consider teaching them the English, or that language which they understand, the Urdu, the Farsi, whatever it is, right? Because they need to really understand the meaning. Although I heard Sheikh Hamza once say, for example, that the benefit of reading the Arabic, there's some benefit just in the sounds. So I guess we have a challenge, as American-born Muslims to do both. But we probably should be doing that. We should probably be going about it that way. One of the evidences for me as a parent in this regard is that I've noticed with the college-age students who are Muslim, there's this tendency to gravitate toward Buddhism because of the meditation, because of that experience of finding calm. Although they're not really they're getting like an American rendition of Buddhism. They're not getting the strict discipline of Buddhism. I'm not sure our kids could handle that. But what they're getting is the loving kindness aspects of Buddhism. And what's shocking to me about that, right, is if you go to the Quran talks about repeatedly loving kindness, right? It's in our tradition. But somehow we have not communicated that to them. Who but our prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did meditation. He meditated in a cave. That's our tradition. What? Like, why are our kids not seeing that as our tradition? Why are we not giving them those gifts? I know that part of it is because we're also under the gun in the sense of we have so much coming at us as Muslims, right? It's like every other day we're reacting to something, and we have to find a way to like sort of keep our focus and not always react. So, for example, another thing that happened recently, right, was this sister who did an article in Playboy magazine. I don't know if you're all familiar with this or not. So a Muhajibi sister did an article in Playboy, supposedly on modesty. She wrote, right, no, there weren't pictures of her, but there was an article written in Playboy. And I'm going to assume that her intentions were actually good, right? I don't know her that well. I know of her. She's a fashion designer. But regardless, there are real implications to this, right? First of all, it drives people to the magazine who may never have even thought about looking at that magazine, and we already have a problem with pornography in our community. Also, the unintended consequences, right, from my professional perspective, is that this could fetishize our hijab. So it could turn something that we use to regulate sexuality in public space as a tool for sex, which is the opposite of what we want to accomplish. So we have people get detoured in trying to put out these, deal with these issues as opposed to focusing on something long-term, like connecting our children with their deen, like how are they going to, realize the spirituality. And so that's just one example, but we get these like every other day. And we have to do better. We have to figure that out. Like, how do we avoid? Maybe we just ignore those things and keep focus. But I don't have all the answers for that. But yeah.
My name is Shafi. I am a psychiatrist. I work for Kaiser. So I will fully endorse what you said, especially I would say everybody, including myself, that when we have some mental illness, we should go to somebody who knows our culture. For example, I have a case in which the therapist, who was not from our culture, he had a case of Indian parents. They were going into major depression just because their daughter does not want to marry. And he was like confused why they are in so much depression. It's the daughter's, she does not want to marry, that's it. So he has no idea what Indian and Pakistani parents, how they feel when daughters or son, they don't like to marry or something else. It's just like a matter of life and death. So in that way, they can give you better suggestions. Our first priority should be like that. And second, everybody should have 10-15 minutes with their kids every day, if not every day, at least on weekends. That's it.
Thank you.
Let's just go here, and then we'll go here. We'll play zigzag.
My question was that how do we find the balance between the pop culture that our children are in and the Islamic tradition we want to bring them up with?
I don't have that answer. I'm not sure.
Because we want them to fit into society and function and, you know, be successful and, you know, helpful in the community. But at the same time, we don't want them to let go of their traditional Islamic, you know, identity. So where is that balance we teach them?
Yeah, I think that I'm not really sure, and part of the reason I'm not sure is because I think that what I've seen across the country are some regional differences, like what the main issues seem to be in different regions of the country. So I think that's the first step. Like, what are our issues? Like, so if you take IOK for example, what are the predominant issues that you see here in IOK, right? First, start there, and then what. You really need creative people in this process, right? Who are the more artistic people in your community to come up with the creativity and the ideas of how to do that. I know that we have things that inspire, like, for example, we have the group Native Dean, right? Now, to the dominant culture, I don't know how they view Native Dean. Maybe they don't view it as, you know, the same music as they do pop music, right? But our kids do. Like, when they're introduced to that as young people, they become fans of, like, Native Dean, right? I mean, like, so we have the ability to create our own culture expressions. Art. We can like, one thing, like my daughter. I'll give my daughter an example. She's a freshman in high school, my youngest, and she recently created her own club, right? And they call it Social Justice Through a Lens. And the idea is that they are 4 times a year going to present photo essays of social justice issues. She came up with this idea on her own, and my role in this is now just to support it. But that's something that's within our value system, and something, you know, like, so also asking them what do they want to do, right?
Is it like, what's the better approach? Is it to expose them in society where they go to the public schools or whatnot, or shelter them, or you homeschool them, or keep them immersed in the Islamic system, like Islamic schools? Like, what do you see? Is it based on the individual child, what they can handle or how they handle?
It's such a
you can
complex
only keep them in a bubble for so long.
Yeah, it's such a complex question, right? Because it's many different things, right? And the problem is there is a certain aspect that's individual. Some kids are stronger than other kids. But honestly, from what I've seen in the public schools, I see nothing promising in the public schools. The problem, though, is then we get into an issue of socioeconomic, you know, status, because not many people can afford the private schools. So then what's your other option? Maybe homeschooling. The issues we see coming out of homeschooled children sometimes are the social issues of not being able to necessarily
Integrate
socialize.
with everybody.
Yeah. And also, when they've not had that experience in the broader public, when they finally do, it's like they go, you know, overboard because they don't know how to handle it. But, you know, I'm a huge advocate for starting high schools, but that takes a lot of resources as well, right?
Your children go to public schools, or are they?
So I've had both experiences.
Okay.
My eldest daughter went to a public school because she's an athlete and she wanted to be able to continue her sports. And, you know, she's muhajaba, or, you know, and everything. And it was really, really challenging. She's in college now, but when she was in high school, the kids were inundating her with, you know, oh, you must be a lesbian because you don't have a boyfriend. Having no regard for her hijab, you know, like, why don't you come to a party, you know, offering her drugs. I was just, and the only reason I know about it is because she told me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known. My younger daughter has always preferred a private education, so It wasn't easy. It wasn't difficult for us to convince her to go to a private school, and her school is pretty affordable, but she goes to a private Catholic all-girls school. But even that has its challenges. And so we're 2 months into the school year, and I've already heard about every type of sex that you can imagine. All these horrific, texting things that are going on. And yesterday, I'll give you an example of something that happened yesterday. So they're having this homecoming dance coming up, and boys are coming to their school to invite the girls to these dances with like posters and flowers and all this stuff. And my daughter is telling me about it in the car on the way home, and she's already told us that she wants to get married after she graduates from high school. So we know she's already thinking about this. But what was not so obvious is really how internally this was affecting her, right? So I proactively said, that's really got to be tough. I can't imagine seeing all these other people receiving this validation, but you're not, feeling like you're getting it, right? And although I know she truly believes that she needs to wait, and she finds some of their behavior like really disgusting, these are her words, right? It still it's having an impact, right? So when I said to her, I'm really proud of you that you're waiting and that you're, making this decision to preserve yourself, because these young boys, the things they're thinking about are really not worth it at this point. They don't even have a real sense of what they're doing. She started bawling her eyes out because there was something underneath that I couldn't see with my eye, right? It wasn't until I started asking the deeper question. So when we ask our kids, how was your day at school? They'll all say fine to dismiss us and get rid of us, right? It's like we have to stay with it and ask more. But not as an investigator, just as like a support, right? And so what happens, she had her cry and she got it out, and I said, hey, let's start thinking about the kind of man that you want to marry, And she started laughing. And it kind of went away after that, and she was okay. But this is going to keep coming up. And so I had a conversation with my husband around, number one, him reiterating what I said and supporting what I said to her already from the male perspective. Okay. And then two, his involvement, telling her, look, I'm going to help you with this. I'm going to help you figure out who your husband is going to, I'm involved, I'm here. Because unfortunately for us, we're both converts. We don't have the extended Muslim family. So we're even more challenged in that way. But these are the kind of conversations that we have to have. I don't have all the answers to it, but that's been my experience,
The communication, basically.
If I may have a couple of minutes to say something, if we keep in mind, and this is to serve as a reminder, if we keep in mind that nothing that we are experiencing as Muslims nowadays, that the Prophet ﷺ did not experience. And we could think, oh, what about Islamophobia? He experienced it. What about, people being exposed? He experienced it. He experienced every single thing that we could possibly go through, and that happened for a reason. So if we really deepen our understanding in our religion, I promise you, because I'm a seminary student here, it will soften the heart, and it will bring ease to the heart, and it will bring understanding to many things that you as a parent might think that it's a worrisome or stressed out. We have the power of prayers. Sometimes we forget, but we really do. My 14-year-old was a struggle for him to get up and pray Fajr. And that's something I really wanted him to do. Just in the last month, he wakes me up. I'm like, how did that happen? And I forget that I made dua for it. Really make dua, and make dua every day for the same thing over and over and over, and inshallah, it will be answered. Another thing I want you to keep in mind, the Prophet ﷺ said, and Sheikh Imran, correct me if I'm wrong, that Islam came in a strange time, and it will always be in a strange time. No matter when Islam is, which is the rest of our life, it's strange. We will never fit in. This idea of fitting in is not Islamic. We're never gonna fit in. Really, seriously, how am I gonna fit in? We're never gonna fit in. I went to public school, I wasn't covered at public school. I didn't fit in. I was in sports team, I didn't fit in. My parents were in North Carolina, I had the southern accent, I still didn't fit in. No matter what you do, you'll never fit in, so that is not a goal of ours, nor do we want to instill it in our kids. We were born to shine, we were born to be exquisite, really, truly. What we have of a religion is a treasure, and I think nowadays with everything that's around us, we fail to see it as a blessing, and we try to perhaps water it down. And what I have to say, what worked for me as a teenager growing up here, my home was solid. It was really solid. My parents didn't bow down or change rules or bend rules. My dad was very strong in his convictions and his traditions of Islam, and my mom was, they were both on the same page, although my mom, we would hear her say, you're too harsh on them. They were both on the same page, and they stuck to the rules of Islam, not to the point where we couldn't breathe around them. We were still able to communicate with them, but when we went outside to society, we knew we're coming back to solid foundation. So the way you could do it is pray, deepen your understanding of our religion, because sometimes we as adults, like you said, we don't know a lot of things. In the seminary program, I'm discovering that a lot of my Islam was cultural. So when you peel culture away, Islam is really simple. It's really simple. Then you bring culture to it, and it complicates so many things. So you have the Pakistani culture and the Arabic culture, and then, no, that's not it. Then I don't fit in with my parents now, and it's all good. So alhamdulillah, I invite you to take advantage of the extension courses. This was not a marketing piece, wallahi. It just came in. We have an extension course starting next Saturday. It's the tafsir of Juz' Amma, which is the last chapter in the Quran. We always recite it, most of us memorized it. Come and learn what it is all about. Come and learn the words, come and learn why it came down, what was the purpose, what was happening at that time. It's always, always important to know the context of why a certain verse comes down, because it's happening now. Sheikh Farhan will be starting that class next Saturday, inshallah, from 9 to 11. I'm sorry, no, it's for 10 months, 10 weeks. Yeah, until I think the 17th of December. And it's for 16 years old and older. So if you have a teenager, you would like them to come, please do enroll them. We also have a Quran class that's starting for adults and for kids from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock on Saturday. So that is also an opportunity. And earlier when I was introducing Miss Heather, somebody said, I'm surprised in her bio it said LGBT. Some Muslims are gays and lesbians, and it's a struggle, and it's something that they are facing, and they are being pushed away from family and friends, and it's something they deal with. Pornography is another thing that's taken over our communities. As a principal, as a person who's involved in different communities, you hear a lot of stories, and you see a lot of youth especially super confused about it. And as parents, the more we come and hear these kind of lectures, and the more we are aware, the less we are shocked when they bring things from public school. Even though we want to keep certain traditions in our home, my son the other day, he knows I'm not going to send him to the dance. He came and said, just again, why can't we go to the dance? Just remind me. Then his 12-year-old brother said, we don't go to the dance because we don't put ourselves in a situation that we're going to go weekend in it. And he told him what I was telling them, but alhamdulillah, every kid is different. And the Prophet ﷺ found a way to reach a person, whoever he's talking to, according to that person's level of intellect, level of who he is in society. Get to know your kids. Wallahi, get to know your kids. Sometimes life takes us and we're busy and routine gets in. We have soccer, we have projects, we have all kind of stuff, for me at least. Get to know your kids as individuals, not at what you want them to know, get to know them. Because telling you, living in society where you go to public school and you come to a Muslim home, it's two double lives. And I promise you it's a lot of stress. It's really a lot of stress that parents who did not experience it, you won't know how it feels like. Even if you put them in a Muslim school, even if you put them in any kind of school, even if you homeschool them, there's something inside of them that's growing, and hormones and all kind of things. So they need a friend. They need a friend. And the Prophet ﷺ said, when they get to a certain age, befriend them. You know, we always want to be the authority figures. That's not what they need right now. Because all their friends are pulling them away from us. And guess what? They're going to gravitate that way. So get to know them, get to know their friends, invite them over. Muslims or non-Muslims, invite them over. Get to know their world. And inshallah, that will bridge between you and them.
Amen. I think
Yes.
you brought such a great point
Yes.
about, like, so the dances, right?
Yes.
So some children will be okay with you explaining to the extent that you did, right?
Yes.
Other children will still need to more. They'll need you to talk about, well, what would you get out of going to a dance? What would that look like to you? What do you imagine you would get from that? And, you know, then talking about whatever their answer is there. So it is also child dependent. And like you said, it's getting to know that particular child.
Personality and what they want and what they need.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us this month. Next month, we have a brother, Ziad Ramadan. He's coming to talk to us about pornography. I really want you guys to spread the word. We are pushing the envelope this year with topics. I'm going to bring all the topics. I'm going to bring things that, you know, Muslims usually, you know, hush-hush about them. Pornography exists in our communities, and it's a very, very, very big problem, especially in our youth who don't speak out, who don't say anything. They are struggling with it silently. And whoever will be joining us that Saturday, inshallah, also will have the opportunity to speak to our youth from 11:15 to 11:45. So thank you for coming. We're taking away time from the youth, inshallah. And thank you again for being here with us, Ms. Heather. Looking forward to you returning and being with us again. Jazakallah khairan. Anything else? So please join us next Saturday, the first Saturday of November. I think it's November 7th. And please keep in mind the 2 extension courses that are starting next Saturday, Juzu Amma and Lisan Quran, which is the Arabic programs. And the Quran class that's starting from 11 to 1 o'clock. It's for adults and kids. Jazakumullah khairan.